3 minutes past midnight in New York City. The only sound in the Second Chance's outreach office was the hum of the server banks and the hiss of the rain against the glass, a constant, weeping sound that blurred the skyline into a watercolor of neon grief. Isabella Caruso, was manning the crisis line. It was usually quiet this late, just the desperate and the damned reaching out before the sun gave them a reason to pretend again. Then the sirens started, a distant wail climbing up the canyons of Midtown, getting closer. My phone, the personal one, vibrated on the desk, a silent alert from a ghost network I was never supposed to have access to. It was not a call, just a ping, a notification that Luca Moretti's night had just been ruined. I knew the protocol. I knew what the ping meant. It meant someone was watching him. And by extension, watching me? I closed my eyes, and I could hear the call he must have just received, the words relayed through whispers and encrypted channels until they landed in my own feed, a privilege of a past I had tried to bury. "She's leaving, sir, and you're the last name she spoke." The words hung in the sterile air of my office, cold and final. I did not know who she was. In Luca's world, it could be anyone, a witness, a rival, a lover. It did not matter. The sirens were the punctuation. My desk phone rang, the official line, jarring me from the phantom network. I snatched it up. "Second Chances. This is Isa." "Isa, thank God." The voice was breathless, panicked. "Nurse Kendall, a good woman, a friend. It is Carmen Alvarez. She was in an accident, a hit and run. It looks bad. Isa, they brought her to Mercy General." My blood went cold, colder than the rain lashing the windows. Carmen, the woman who had pulled me from the gutter, who had seen a mind where everyone else saw damaged goods, the woman who had funded my education, who'd co-founded this shelter with me, my mentor, my rock. "I am on my way," I said, my voice flat, betraying nothing. "Wait. Isa, there is something else," Kendall rushed on, her voice dropping. "She is in and out, but she is asking for someone. She keeps repeating a name. I already knew. The sirens, the ping, the timing. The universe did not deal in coincidence. Not in my life." "Luca," Kendall whispered, confirming it. "She's asking for Luca Moretti." I was out the door in 10 seconds, the lock clicking shut behind me. The drive to Mercy General was a blur of hydroplaning tires and blinding flashes of red and blue, the city lights smeared across the wet asphalt, a chaotic abstract painting that mirrored the state of my own heart. Each wail of a passing ambulance felt like it was ripping straight through my chest. Carmen, the moral compass of my life, asking for the one man who represented everything she fought against. It did not make sense. I abandoned my car in a loading zone, not caring about the ticket. The emergency room was a special kind of hell at 3:30 in the morning, a cacophony of pain, antiseptic, and bureaucratic apathy. I flashed the hospital volunteer badge I kept for emergencies, a pass Carmen herself had arranged. "Carmen Alvarez," I demanded at the desk. The nurse, overwhelmed, just pointed, "Intensive care unit, 3rd floor, but you cannot." I was already moving, taking the stairs 2 at a time, the adrenaline pounding in my ears. The 3rd floor was quieter, a long, polished hallway that smelled of bleach and fear. I saw the cluster of people first, 2 men in suits that were too clean, too sharp for this hour, and him. He was standing outside the double doors of the ICU, not looking at them, but at the reflection in the safety glass. Luca Moretti, the man I had loved with a ferocity that nearly burned me alive, the man I'd walked away from 7 years ago to save myself. He had not changed. Not really, taller than the others, a stillness about him that was more dangerous than any overt threat. His black hair was shorter, his jawline harder. He wore a dark gray suit that probably cost more than my apartment's rent for a year. He turned, slowly, as if he had sensed my approach. His eyes, those steel gray eyes that had seen too much, locked on mine. The storm was still there, the one he always kept leashed just behind his gaze. He looked at me, and for a heartbeat, the entire hallway, the entire world fell away. There was just the silent, aching history between us. "Issa," he said, his voice was a low gravel, just as I remembered. "Luca," the name tasted like ash in my mouth. "Why is she asking for you?" Before he could answer, a thicker, shorter man stepped forward. One of the suits, I recognized him instantly. Vinny Rinaldi. Not Mafia, not technically. He was the man who handled things. The one who ran the hospital protection rackets, the unions, the man who made problems disappear. He was Don Vittorio's man, Luca's uncle. "Miss Caruso," Vinny said, a sickly, sweet smile that did not reach his dead eyes. "A terrible tragedy. We are just here to offer our support." I looked past him. Two other men, younger, were down the hall, talking to a nervous-looking resident. They wore generic blue jackets with letters stitched on the back. F.B. They were fakes. I had seen enough of Luca's men, and enough real agents, to know the difference. The angle of their bodies, the way their hands never strayed far from their sides. They were not asking questions. They were applying pressure. "Are you?" I asked Vinny, my voice dripping ice, asking the staff if she managed to say anything before she lost consciousness. Vinny's smile tightened. Luca shot him a look, a tiny, fractional movement of his head, and Vinny stepped back, melting into the shadows of the corridor. "She is my family." "Luca," I said, turning my focus back to him. "Whatever this is, I am not leaving." "She's not conscious," he said, his voice quiet. "She has not been—" A lie. Kendall said she was in and out. As if summoned, Nurse Kendall appeared, pushing through the ICU doors. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with relief when she saw me. "Issa, she just woke up. She's asking for you. You have to be quick." I pushed past Luca, ignoring the way his hand twitched, as if to stop me. The room was dark, filled with the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and the hiss of the ventilator. Carmen looked small, so small, lost in the tangle of tubes and white sheets. Her strong, vibrant face was swollen, bruised a sickening shade of purple and black, but her eyes were open, and they were sharp, burning with a desperate intensity. She saw me, and her chapped lips moved. I leaned in close, my hair brushing her cheek, the smell of copper and antiseptic filling my lungs. "Issa," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. It took all her strength. "Mercy ledger." I frowned. The Mercy ledger. The accounting book for the charity. "Sophia lives—" The words hit me like a physical blow. Sophia, the name I had buried, the name of the daughter I had been told was stillborn 7 years ago. What I whispered, my whole body shaking. "Carmen, what are you saying?" "Ledger," she breathed. "Sophia." Her eyes rolled back. The steady beep of the monitor beside her bed suddenly accelerated into a piercing, flatline squeal. "She is crashing," Kendall screamed, shoving me backward. Get a doctor code blue. Get her out of here." I stumbled back into the hallway, my heart trying to claw its way out of my throat. The doors slammed shut. Luca grabbed my arm, his grip like a steel manacle. "You are done here," he said. "Not—" His voice hard, urgent. "This is not safe. Vinny's men are all over this place. You are coming with me." I ripped my arm from his grasp. The shock was already hardening into a familiar, cold rage. "I am not going anywhere with you. I am not one of your assets to be managed. Luca, not anymore." "This is not a request. Isabella." "I have survived worse nights than you know," I spat, the words laced with 7 years of bitterness. "Worse than you. I am staying for Carmen." I turned my back on him, a definitive final gesture, and stared at the closed ICU doors. My world tilting on its axis. Sophia lives. It was a lie. It had to be. My eyes scanned the room I had just been ejected from. Looking through the small glass portal, the crash team was working on her. Frantic, obscured figures. My gaze dropped, tracing the lines of the hospital bed, down to the metal frame near the floor. Something was there, something that did not belong. A small, white envelope I'd held against the gray steel by a single piece of surgical tape. My mind went blank. All I knew was I had to have it. Luca was arguing with Vinny, his back to me, his voice a low, threatening rumble. The fake agents were distracted by the code blue alarm light. I slipped back to the door, my hand finding the handle. I did not open it. I knelt, pretending to tie my shoe, my body shielding my actions. My fingers brushed the envelope. It was thick. I ripped it free and jammed it into the waistband of my jeans, hidden by my jacket. I stood up, my heart hammering. I retreated down the hall, away from Luca, away from the ICU. I needed a bathroom, a private space, just for 1 minute. I found a visitor's restroom, locked the door, and ripped the envelope open. Inside, there was no note, just 2 items, a small, old-fashioned brass key, the kind used for a post office box or a safety deposit locker, and a single USB flash drive. It was wrapped tightly in black electrical tape. Scratched onto the tape in white ink was 1 word: Mercy. I stared at it. Mercy Ledger, Carmen's last words. I pocketed the items and splashed cold water on my face. Looking at my own reflection in the cracked mirror, my eyes were too wide, my face too pale. I stepped back into the hallway and froze. Down by the elevators, standing in the pool of light from the vending machine, were 2 men. They were not Vinny's men in suits, and they were not the fake agents. These men wore baseball caps pulled low, nondescript jeans, and dark hoodies. They were watching the ICU. They were watching Luca. They were watching everyone. The trap was set. Carmen had not been an accident. She had been silenced, and she had just passed the baton to me. I leaned against the wall, the cold tile seeping through my shirt, and I let the truth of it settle over me. Sophia lives. I whispered it to the empty, sterile air. If Sophia is real, then every goodbye we ever said was a lie. The weight of the USB drive in my waistband was a solid, cold reality against my skin. Sophia lives. The words were a wrecking ball, and the foundations of the life I had built over the last 7 years were crumbling, revealing the toxic ruins I had tried to pave over. I saw Luca arguing with Vinny Rinaldi, his back to me, his shoulders rigid. Just seeing the set of his shoulders threw me back in time, to a different life, a different girl. I was not always Isabella Caruso, founder of the Second Chances Fund. Once, I was just Isa from Little Italy, the daughter of a longshoreman and a seamstress, a girl who spoke code better than she spoke English. I was smart. Too smart for my own good, a tech prodigy rattling around a neighborhood that valued loyalty over ambition. Carmen Alvarez found me. She was running a community outreach program, and she saw me hacking the city's public library network just to get access to textbooks my parents could not afford. Instead of turning me in, she got me a scholarship. She saved me. She told me my mind was a gift, not a liability. She was the only one until him. I met Luca Moretti in a tiny cafe on Mulberry Street. I was 22, debugging the cafe's ancient router for a free cannoli. He walked in, and the entire place went silent. He was not there for coffee. He was there to collect. The owner, a sweet old man named Sal, was shaking, his face pale. Luca was quiet, polite, and absolutely terrifying. His presence sucked the air out of the room. He looked at me, his eyes sweeping over my laptop, the tangle of wires, and then me. I did not look away. I had seen tough guys my whole life. He was something else. He was organized. He settled his business with Sal with a quiet word, and then he walked over to my table. "You are fast," he said. "I am good," I replied, not looking up from the screen. "I have a server that disagrees with me, violently." I finally looked up. "I do not fix things for men who make old men shake." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. A dangerous, beautiful thing. He was skimming. I was adjusting the books. He slid a card across the table. "I will pay you triple what the geeks in suits charge, and I will make sure Sal's nephew, the one with the gambling problem, finds a new hobby." That was Luca, a threat and a promise wrapped in one, a stray bullet, just like I thought, dangerous and warm all at once. I took the job, and then I took another. Within 6 months, I was debugging his entire shadow empire, and I was in his bed. I loved him, and I loved him with a stupid, reckless abandon that defied all of Carmen's warnings. I was working on my own project then, something clean. It was a platform called Mosaic, an idea I had with some other coders. We wanted to build an integrated database for nonprofits, connecting donors directly with needs, cutting out the bureaucratic graft. We were idealistic. We were fools. We needed funding, and the Rinaldi Capital Fund approached us. They loved it. They wanted to invest, heavily. Then came the catch. A tiny, encrypted module they wanted us to insert into the core code. A proprietary routing algorithm, they called it. I knew what it was. It was a laundry, a digital washing machine for dirty money. I went to Carmen, shaking with rage. She put her hand on my arm, her gaze steady. This is the world. Isa, the lines are never clear. One day, you will have to choose between the truth and survival. I remember I let out a short, harsh laugh. I will choose the truth. Carmen always. She shook her head, a sad smile on her face. That is because you have not had to buy your survival yet. That day came sooner than I expected. My world was not just Luca. I had Mara, my foster sister, the closest thing to real family I had. She was a nurse at Mercy General, funny and tough, the only person I could cry in front of. And there was Enzo, Luca's consigliere. He was not like the others. He was quiet, a thinker, a man who read philosophy and broke kneecaps with the same detached precision. He saw the liability in my relationship with Luca, but he respected my brain, and he was a gray man, living in a gray world. And then there was Detective Aisha Patel, a rare good cop in a bad precinct. Carmen had saved Aisha's younger brother from a charge that would have ruined his life, proved he was clean. Aisha owed Carmen a debt, a moral one, the kind that never gets repaid, only honored. These were the pieces on the board when the world ended. I was pregnant, Luca's child. I was terrified and, somewhere deep down, stupidly happy. He was, too. I saw it in his eyes, a softening I had never seen before. And he was talking about logistics companies, community centers, a way out, a way to get clean. But his uncle, Don Vittorio, did not want clean. He wanted the old ways. He saw me as a vulnerability, a working-class tech nerd who had no place in the family. I went into labor 2 months early. It was a night of rain and panic. I was bleeding. Mara got me to the hospital. St. Brigid, not Mercy because it was closer. They rushed me into surgery. Luca was not there. He was in Chicago, a meeting he could not miss. Something about unions. I remember screaming for him. When I woke up, the world was gray. Don Vittorio was sitting in the chair by the bed, not Luca. His face was a mask of practiced sympathy. "The baby," I whispered, my hand flying to my empty, flat stomach. There were complications. Isabella, he said, his voice soft, oily, a girl. She did not make it, stillborn. I broke, a sound ripped out of my throat that was not human. I asked to see her, to hold her. "It is better if you do not," Vittorio said, standing up. She was underdeveloped. "The hospital has procedures. I will handle all the arrangements. You do not need to trouble yourself." He handled it. He handled the death certificate. He handled the cremation. He handled everything. Luca returned 2 days later, a ghost. He held me while I wept, but he was not there. He was hollow. The loss, or perhaps the relief, had broken something between us. He never questioned his uncle's arrangements. He just accepted. I could not. I could not stay in a world that took my child and turned her into an arrangement. I could not look at the man who let it happen. A week later, I was gone. I left Luca. I left the penthouse, the money, the danger, and the lie that I could ever be safe there. I took nothing but the clothes I was wearing and a burned-out laptop. I went back to Carmen. She did not say I told you so. She just held me while I fell apart, and then she helped me put the pieces back together. We built Second Chances from the ground up, a place for people who had nowhere else to turn. I poured my grief, my rage, my code into it. I built a fortress around my heart. I told myself it owed nothing to anyone, especially not to Luca Moretti. That was 7 years ago. In that time, Luca had made good on his word. He was Luca Moretti, CEO. He ran logistics. He built community centers. He was the polished face of the new Moretti family, the one that donated to politicians and sat on hospital boards. He was whitewashing the empire. But I knew, we all knew, that Don Vittorio and the Rinaldi family were still pulling the strings from the shadows. The dirty money still had to flow. And over the last few years, a new name had surfaced in the whispers, in the encrypted data I still monitored, a ghost, the auditor. No one knew who he was. He was not Mafia, he was something else. He was the one who managed the real money, the dark river of cash that flowed between politics, high finance, and, according to Carmen's frantic research, the healthcare system. He was the architect, the Rinaldis, Vittorio. They were just the muscle. The auditor was the brain. And now, standing in this cold hospital corridor, with the smell of bleach in my nose and the weight of a stolen flash drive in my hand, Carmen's last words echoed in my head. Sophia lives. She had not just spoken a name. She had thrown a grenade into the center of my life. She had handed me the pin. That wall I had built, that fortress of cynical scar tissue, it was gone, vaporized. 7 years of lies, 7 years of buried grief, 7 years of phantom pain, all of it ripped open by 2 words. I looked down the hall. The men in the baseball caps were still there. The fake agents were gone. But Vinny Rinaldi was now talking quietly into his phone. Luca was gone, probably to the lobby, to command his territory. The ICU doors opened. Nurse Kendall came out, her face streaked with tears. She did not have to say a word. I knew. Carmen was gone. But she had left me a map and a name. The code blue alarm was still echoing in my head, a soundtrack to the end of the world. Nurse Kendall was sobbing into her hands. I ignored Kendall's attempt to guide me away. I pushed back through the doors into the room. The crash team was silent, their movements slow, defeated. A young doctor was marking the time on a chart. "I am saying goodbye," I said, my voice flat, daring him to stop me. He just nodded, pulling the curtain slightly to give me a moment. I looked down at Carmen, the bruises, the tubes, the stillness. This woman who was pure energy, pure righteous fire, was inert. I reached out and touched her hand. It was still warm. Her eyes flew open. A sound, a dry, horrific gasp, rattled in her chest. She was not gone. Not yet. The doctor startled, moving back toward the bed. Carmen's eyes found mine. They were burning. She had seconds, not minutes. "St. Gabriel's," she whispered, a sound like dry leaves scraping stone. "Locker 23. And then a final, soft exhale. The light in her eyes extinguished. This time, it was real. This time, she was gone. The doctor gently placed his fingers on her neck. He looked at me, his expression full of pity. "She is gone. Miss, I am so sorry." I walked out. The hallway seemed too long, the lights too bright. Luca was down the hall, near the elevators, a dark silhouette commanding the space. Vinny was gone, but the men in the baseball caps were still there, pretending to look at their phones. They were watching the intensive care unit. They were watching Luca. They were waiting. I needed space. I found the hospital chapel, empty at this hour, smelling of stale coffee and old polish. I sat in the back pew and pulled out my secure laptop. My hands were shaking so badly it took 2 tries to get the Mercy flash drive into the port. The drive mounted, one file, locked, encrypted with a strength I recognized. Professional. The password hint was a single phrase, date of arrangements. Bile rose in my throat. The arrangements. The day Don Vittorio had handled my daughter's cremation, the day he had handed me an empty urn and told me to grieve quietly. I knew the date. I would never forget it. I hovered my fingers over the keys, the men in the caps, the fake agents, Vinny. This was not just a file, it was bait. Carmen must have known they would look for it. They were probably watching the file right now, waiting for it to be accessed. I smiled, a thin, cold expression in the dim chapel light. I typed the date, but I intentionally swapped the last 2 digits, a typo. I hit enter, access denied. My custom firewall, the one I built myself, lit up, a red flag. Someone had just tried to ping my connection to trace the exact location of my laptop, an internet protocol address, masked through 3 different countries but originating domestically. Gotcha! They were watching, and they were impatient. I closed the laptop. The grief for Carmen was a cold, hard stone in my chest, but beside it, something else was growing, a rage so pure it was almost calming. I walked back out into the main corridor. The men in the caps saw me and tensed, speaking into their sleeves. I needed to get out of the building, but they were between me and the exit, and I had to get to St. Gabriel's. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I had sworn I would never use again. It rang once. He answered. No greeting. I need you, I said, my voice low and clipped. 15 minutes, main entrance, come alone. I hung up before he could reply. I hated it. I hated the weakness, the dependency. I hated that in this city. His name was a battering ram and mine was just a target. But I needed that battering ram, just for tonight. I waited by the nursing station, watching the clock. 12 minutes later, the 2 fake agents, the ones who had flashed the bogus Federal Bureau of Investigation badges earlier, rounded the corner. They were walking straight for me. Miss Caruso, the taller one started, trying for an official tone. We need to ask you a few more questions about Miss Alvarez. If you could come with us. He reached for my arm. Would you? A new voice, sharp and laced with authority, cut through the hallway. Detective Aisha Patel stood there, looking like she had not slept in a week. She was wearing a trench coat over jeans, and she held a steaming coffee cup in one hand and her gold detective's shield in the other. Detective Patel, New York Police Department, homicide, she said, her eyes boring into the 2 men. And you 2 are... They flashed their credentials again. Aisha laughed, a short, sharp sound. Those are terrible fakes. You bought them on the internet. Get out of my crime scene before I process you for obstruction of justice and impersonating federal officers. The men bristled, their hands moving toward their jackets. I would not, Aisha warned, her voice dropping. I have 6 uniformed officers checking your plates in the garage right now. You have 10 seconds. They looked at each other. A silent calculation. They turned and walked away, disappearing down the stairs. Aisha looked at me. I saw the grief for Carmen in her eyes, warring with the cop's hardened glare. At the end of the hall, Luca appeared, a dark sentinel. Aisha saw him. She looked from him to me. She understood. She dug into her pocket and tossed me a set of keys. My personal car, blue sedan, garage level 2, slot 20B, run first, Isa, go. I will hold them off. As Aisha. Carmen saved my brother. I am honoring the debt. Go. I ran. I heard Luca's footsteps behind me. We did not speak. We hit the service stairs and took them down, emerging into the concrete chill of the parking garage. We moved through the shadows, just as we had 7 years ago, 2 ghosts haunting the same city. He grabbed my arm as we reached the freight elevator. You are done. You are compromised. You are coming to the safe house. I ripped my arm from his grasp, turning on him. I am not your property, Luca. I am not a package to be secured. I am not going into one of your gilded cages while you handle this. This is not a cage. Isabella, it is survival. They just tried to grab you. My survival, I hissed. My terms. This is my world now. Luca, not yours. Carmen left me the key. I am leading. You can follow or you can get out of my way. His eyes blazed, the storm unleashed. For a second, I thought he would pick me up and carry me out, but something in my face, something of the last 7 years of hardness, made him pause. Where he finally bit out. Aisha's car. I'm driving. We piled into the unremarkable blue sedan. The rain hammered the windshield, the wipers fighting a losing battle. I gunned the engine and peeled out of the garage, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Luca sat beside me, a monument of controlled fury. The silence in the car was heavier than the storm outside. I pulled the laptop onto my lap, tethered it to my secure phone, and plugged the Mercy drive back in. This time, I typed the correct password. The file unlocked. It was not just a ledger. There was a folder. Inside, an audio file. I double-clicked it. Carmen's voice, recorded, but just as clear and urgent as her whisper, filled the small car. When if I fall, Isa, do not let Mercy become a morgue for secrets. They are selling children. They are selling hope. The auditor is at the center. The ledger is the key, but the proof is Sophia. Follow the ledger, find Sophia. Do not let them. The audio cut out. I was driving blind, tears mixing with the rain on the windshield. Luca said nothing. The address in the file, attached to the audio note, was not a surprise. St. Gabriel's. It was nearly 4 a.m. when I parked Aisha's car in the alley behind the church. The key Carmen had hidden in the envelope was not for a locker. It was an old, heavy iron key. It slid perfectly into the lock of the parish office side door. The church was cold, hollow, and silent, save for the storm raging outside. We used the flashlight on my phone. "Locker 23, I whispered, more to myself than to him. "In the sacristy," Luca said, already moving. "Behind the tapestry of St. Michael. My grandmother used to hide the donation silver there." Of course he knew. His family had probably built this church. He pulled back the heavy, faded tapestry. There it was, a wall of small, brass lockers. I walked to 23. The other key from the envelope, the small brass one, slid into the lock. It turned with a smooth click. Inside was a small, metal box. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would break my ribs. I lifted it out and placed it on the altar. I opened the lid. On top was a small, black book, the Mercy Ledger. My fingers trembled as I touched it. Beneath it, a folded document and a single faded Polaroid photograph. I picked up the photo, a newborn, swaddled in a pale blue hospital blanket. On the back, written in Carmen's sharp handwriting, was a parcel tracking code. I unfolded the document. It was a copy, a birth certificate from St. Bridget Hospital. My eyes scanned the boxes. Mother Isabella Caruso, Father Luca Moretti. Name Sophia. "Luca." My voice was a choked sound. He took the photograph from my numb fingers. He stared at the image of the child. His gaze snapped to my face, then to my neck, to the small, crescent-shaped birthmark just below my ear. He looked back at the photo. On the baby's neck, barely visible, was the same tiny, perfect crescent. He looked up at me. His steel-gray eyes shattered. The control was gone, replaced by a raw, profound shock that mirrored my own. "Isa," he whispered, his voice hoarse, broken. "Sophia is ours." As the words left his lips, the church bells high above us began to toll. A deep, mournful sound, impossible for this hour of the morning. A flash of light. From the high stained glass window depicting the Virgin Mary, a glint, a reflection, a rifle scope. "Down," I screamed. I threw myself at him, tackling him with all my weight. We crashed to the cold stone floor just as a sound like a cannon blast ripped through the sanctuary. The stained glass window exploded inward, showering us in a rain of fractured blue and red glass and plaster dust. The bullet, meant for Luca's head, thudded deep into the oak of the altar where we had just been standing. The war was no longer a shadow. It was here. And Carmen, in her final act, had placed me at the absolute center of it. The floor was vibrating. The air was thick with plaster dust and the sharp smell of cordite. My ears rang with the echo of the gunshot and the impossible tolling of the church bell. Luca did not hesitate. He was already moving when pulling me by the arm, keeping his body low. The crypt. Now. "No!" I yelled, scrambling, grabbing the metal box, the photo, the ledger, the car. They know this place. Aisha's car is the only thing they do not know about. We ran. We burst through the side door back into the alley, the rain hitting us like a physical slap. The bell was still tolling. A grotesque alarm. We piled into the sedan, and I slammed the car into drive, tires spinning on the wet cobblestones before they found purchase. In the rearview mirror, I saw two figures in dark gear emerge from the church alley, weapons raised, too late. I drove without thinking, navigating the empty, rain-slicked streets of lower Manhattan on muscle memory. My hands were shaking, but my mind was ice cold. "St. Bridget," I said, my voice hoarse. I did not look at him. I looked at the birth certificate lying on the dashboard, a pale rectangle in the streetlight. That is where he was. The obstetrician, Dr. Colton. "He signed the death certificate," Luca said. His voice was raw, a layer of control stripped away. "He was the only one in the room, besides the nurses. When they took her away from me, I gripped the wheel. He told me she was beautiful, and then he told me she was gone." Luca pulled out his phone, did not look at his contacts. He just dialed, "Enzo. I need a trace. Dr. Colton, the obstetrician who practiced at St. Bridget's 7 years ago. I need to know where he is. And I need a financial map. Rinaldi Capital, St. Bridget, and a name, the auditor. Find the connection." We swapped the car in a downtown garage, ditching Aisha's sedan for a black town car Enzo had left for us, the keys in the ignition. We drove to a sterile corporate apartment near the financial district, one of Luca's clean properties. It was anonymous, secure, and had the high-speed connection I needed. While Luca paced the living room like a caged panther, I went to work. I plugged the Mercy drive into my laptop. The files were there, but they were a mess, deliberately disorganized. But I saw the pattern. The Mercy ledger was not just one book. It was the hub. It showed donations coming in and charitable disbursements going out. The disbursements were all coded, but they led to one place, a medical shell corporation I had never heard of. And that corporation had one client, St. Bridget Hospital. An hour later, Enzo arrived. He was not a bodyguard. He was a ghost. Appearing in the apartment without a sound, he held a tablet. He did not look at me, only at Luca. "You were right," Enzo said, his voice flat. "The map is dirty. Rinaldi Capital makes a massive and tax-deductible donation to the Mercy Fund every quarter. The fund then disperses 90% of that donation to a shell company called MedEquip Solutions. MedEquip has an exclusive, inflated contract with St. Bridget Hospital, supplying everything from bedpans to bandages." He tapped the screen. A new chart appeared. The payments from St. Bridget do not go back to MedEquip. They are routed offshore to an account managed by one signatory. "The auditor," I whispered, reading it. "And Dr. Colton," Luca demanded. "He left St. Bridget 6 years ago," Enzo said, swiping to a new image. It was a sprawling glass and steel monstrosity on the water. He bought a $10 million house in the Hamptons. Cash. The sale closed exactly 1 week after he signed the death certificate for Sofia Caruso Moretti. I closed my eyes. The $2 million figure from the file I'd glimpsed earlier flashed in my mind. The price of a child. "I have more," I said, my voice sounding distant. I opened the Mercy drive and navigated past the ledgers. The encrypted folder was still there. This time, I had the processing power to break it. It took me 20 minutes. The contents spilled onto my screen. It was not just finance. It was video. My blood ran cold. I clicked the first file. A camera feed, grainy, time-stamped the week of the funeral. It was a cold storage unit. A man in a dark coat was handing a small, swaddled bundle to another man. I could not see their faces, but I saw the bank transfer authorization that was attached. $2 million. From the MedEquip shell to that same auditor-controlled offshore account. And then, the last file, a PDF. It was scanned, slightly crooked, an adoption placement summary. The agency was based in Seattle. The infant's name was redacted, just a single letter S. The date of birth matched Sophia's exactly. "They sold her, Luca," I said, turning the laptop for him to see. "They did not just take her from me. They sold her. Like she was cargo." He looked at the screen, and I watched the last bit of the civilized man, the logistics chief executive officer, vanish. The thing that looked back was the man I had left 7 years ago, the boss. "The tracking code," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "On the back of the Polaroid, you said it was a parcel code." "It is not," I said, my fingers flying across the keys. "I ran it. It is not United States Postal Service. It is a logistics tag, an internal shipping manifest. I cross-referenced the code with the shipping lanes. Red Hook, Pier 7. It is one of your family's terminals." "It is Vittorio's terminal," he corrected, his face hardening. "The cold storage footage," I said. "The pieces clicking together, horrifyingly. It was not a room. It was a refrigerated shipping container. They are not just storing files. Luca, they are storing the master servers. The complete, unedited backup of the auditor's entire black ledger." We were moving before the words had finished hanging in the air. Red Hook at 5 in the morning was a city of steel giants. Sleeping in the fog, rolling off the water, Enzo had his own men, quiet shadows in dark gear, fanning out. Luca and I moved through the alleys of stacked containers. "The container is refrigerated," I said, pulling a small, magnetic disc from my bag. "A beacon. It needs power. It will be in the active row." We found it, a white refrigerated unit, humming loudly in the pre-dawn quiet, plugged into a power pylon. Luca drew his weapon. He nodded at Enzo. Enzo and his men took positions, creating a perimeter. Luca moved to the heavy locking bar on the container door. He did not get to touch it. The door slid open from the inside. The floodlights hit us, blinding us. Figures emerged, silhouettes against the harsh white light, the 2 fake agents from the hospital, a half-dozen of Rinaldi's button men, and in the center, wrapped in a heavy wool coat, looking like he was attending an opera, was Don Vittorio. "Isabella," he said, his voice carrying easily in the cold air. He sounded disappointed. "You should have stayed gone. You were a ghost. Ghosts should know their place." He looked at his nephew. "And you. After all the work we did, after the sacrifice I made to clean this family, you bring this disruption back into our lives." "The ledger, Uncle," Luca said, his voice a low growl. His gun was steady, aimed at Vittorio's chest. "The ledger," Vittorio scoffed. "You are still thinking so small. Nephew, the ledger is just accounting. This," he gestured to the open container behind him, "is the bank." I saw the rows of humming servers inside. "The master file." "You looked me in the eye," I said, my voice shaking with a rage so cold it burned. "You told me my daughter was Ash." "She was a complication," Vittorio snapped, his civility vanishing. "A Caruso brat mixing with Moretti blood. A weakness. I corrected it. Now, give me the ledger and the drive. Give them to me, and perhaps you will live to be a ghost again." One of Rinaldi's men raised his gun, aiming it directly at me. Luca moved. It was not a thought. It was an instinct. He stepped in front of me, his body shielding mine completely, his own weapon swinging toward the gunman. The world exploded. Gunfire erupted from everywhere, a deafening roar of overlapping shots. Enzo's men returned fire. I saw the man aiming at me go down. Luca grabbed me, shoving me behind the container. "The servers," I yelled over the din. I still had the beacon in my hand. He understood. He laid down covering fire, 3 precise shots that drove Vittorio and his men back into the container. In that half-second, I ran, slapped the magnetic beacon onto the side of the server rack, and dove back behind cover. "We are blown," Luca yelled. "This way, the rail tunnels." He grabbed my hand, pulling me away from the firefight toward the old, abandoned rail spur that ran beneath the port. As we ran, I pulled out my phone, dialing Aisha. "Aisha," I screamed into the phone, the sound of gunfire echoing behind us. "Red Hook, Pier 7, it is an ambush. Rinaldi, Vittorio, the fake feds. They are all here. I have the ledger. I have the proof." Carmen was right. "Isa, get out." Her voice was strained, terrified. "I do not care about the proof. The only thing I need right now is for you to live through the night." The call cut out as we plunged into the pitch-black mouth of the tunnel. We ran, stumbling over rotten railroad ties, the air thick with the smell of rust and cold mud. We did not stop until our lungs were bursting. We collapsed in a small maintenance alcove, the only sound our ragged breathing and the distant, muffled pops of the gun battle. I flicked on my phone's flashlight. Luca was leaning heavily against the graffiti-covered wall. "You are hit," I said. "It is a graze," he grunted, his face pale. "Let me see." I pushed his hand away from his side. His shirt was soaked. It was not a graze. A bullet had torn through the flesh of his bicep. He had taken it when he shielded me. My hands were trembling. I tore a long strip from the bottom of my own shirt, balling it up, pressing it hard against the wound. He hissed, a sharp intake of breath, but his eyes never left my face. "See," I whispered, my voice thick, the sarcastic quip catching in my throat, just enough to remind you who is saving who tonight. Enzo found us an hour later. He got us out of the tunnels and into a black sport utility vehicle that smelled like new leather and gun oil. He drove us to Brighton Beach, to a Russian bathhouse owned by a neutral party. It was steamy, anonymous, and the last place Vittorio's men would look. We were in a private steam room, the air thick and hot. A medic Enzo had on call had already stitched Luca's arm. He sat on the tiled bench, a towel wrapped around his waist, the white bandage stark against his skin. I sat across from him. Why, I finally asked, the single word hanging in the hot, wet air. Why did you let him? He told you she was dead, and you just accepted it. He looked down at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were raw. That was the lie. Issa, the one I told myself, the one I let you believe. My breath hitched. "I was not in Chicago," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "That was a story Vittorio created. I was here, in the city, Vittorio and the auditor. They had me. They had leverage on the new port contracts, enough to sink the entire family, to send us all to prison. They gave me a choice." He met my gaze. "They said the Rinaldis were going to hit you, that you were a liability, that Don Vittorio could not control you. They said they could make you disappear, permanently, or I could agree to the arrangement, let them fake the stillbirth, use their adoption channels to place the child, clean, where she could never be traced back to us. They said you would be safe, that you would leave me, that you would finally be free, and that you would be alive." He leaned forward, his face etched in an agony I had never seen. "I chose to let you live, Issa. Even if it meant losing you, I chose to lose my daughter to save her mother." I stared at him, vibrating. It was not a choice. It was a betrayal. It was an abdication. He had not fought, he had negotiated. I felt a wave of pity so profound it made me sick, and a rage so blinding I wanted to hit him. Before I could find a single word, Enzo entered the steam room, holding a burner phone. It was ringing. "It is for you," he said, holding it out to me. I took the phone, my hand trembling. I put it to my ear. The voice was digitized, robotic, and cold. "Stop digging, Miss Caruso. You have the ledger, you have the drive, but we have the product." A text message alert beeped on the burner. I looked at the screen. It was a photograph. Not a baby, a girl. She looked about 15 years old, not 7, my math, my timeline. It was all wrong. She was standing on a sunny street corner, holding a coffee cup, laughing at someone off camera. She was beautiful, and she had Luca's eyes. "She has a good life," the voice said, "a family that loves her. Stop or her peace ends. Your choice." The call clicked off. They thought this would stop me. They thought I would trade her anonymity for the truth. I looked at the picture. My daughter, alive, a teenager. I whispered it, to myself, to Luca, to the ghosts of Carmen and the girl I thought I'd lost. She does not need a fake peace. I looked at Luca. They are wrong. They think this is a threat. It is not. It is confirmation. And they just showed me their leverage. I grabbed my laptop. "Issa, what are you doing?" Luca asked. "Standing up?" "Changing the game," I said, my fingers flying. They want to play chess. "Fine. I am knocking over the board." I packaged the Mercy ledger. I packaged the $2 million transfer. I packaged the cold storage footage. I packaged everything. Everything except the beacon data. Everything except the direct access I now had to the auditor's offshore accounts. I kept the final key. I found the name Aisha had mentioned once, a federal contact she trusted in Seattle. "Enzo," I commanded, my voice sharp. "Get me a secure line to the Seattle Federal Bureau of Investigation field office. Ask for Special Agent Danielle Porter. Tell her Isabella Caruso is sending her the gift of a lifetime." I hovered my finger over the send button. The auditor wanted me to be quiet. I was about to become the loudest person in the world. I hit send. The wind at the Westchester County airfield was a physical force, trying to peel my borrowed jumpsuit right off my body. It was 3 a.m, and the private helipad was lit up like a nightmare's Christmas tree. A sleek, black helicopter sat waiting, its rotors already turning in a slow, lazy arc. This was not a medical evacuation. This was an escape. I adjusted the fake identification badge clipped to my belt. "Aeronet Communications, we keep you connected." I was here to check a faulty router in the flight operations building, a building that just happened to have a direct fiber line to the Rinaldi-owned bank downtown. Vinny Rinaldi was pacing by the helicopter, screaming into his phone. Standing near him, looking pale and terrified, was Dr. Colton, the man who had sold my daughter for $2 million. Across the tarmac, a small fire alarm strobe light began to flash on a distant hangar. A diversion, Enzo. Right on time, he and Luca were creating a phantom security breach, drawing half of Rinaldi's men away from the terminal. I slipped inside the operations building. It was empty, just a bank of servers humming in a small, glass-walled room. I sat at the main terminal, plugged in my laptop, and got to work. My fingers flew. Not fixing the router, but planning the sniffer, a digital parasite that gave me eyes on every piece of data moving through Rinaldi's network. "Okay, you monsters," I whispered to the screen. "Time to pay the bill." I had found the smart contract 2 hours ago, buried in the code of Rinaldi's offshore accounts, a failsafe, built by the auditor himself. It was designed to lock every asset, every digital penny. If a specific set of criteria were met, a security protocol. I just met all the criteria. I hit the enter key. On the tarmac, Vinny Rinaldi's scream was so loud I heard it through the glass. He threw his phone to the ground. Every man on his detail suddenly had his phone to his ear, all of them shouting. The digital river of Rinaldi Capital had just frozen solid. Vinny got back on a different phone, this one a satellite model. "It is locked." "All of it, the transfer to Colton, the fuel payment, all of it, your protocol is choking us." He listened, his face turning a blotchy red. "What do you mean?" "A manual override. You told me this was foolproof in person. You want me to wait for you here." He threw the sat phone. The pilot was gesturing, pointing at his watch. Dr. Colton looked like he was going to be sick. I watched the sniffer feed. The auditor was on his way. He had no choice to unlock the accounts. He had to be physically present at a hardwired terminal, and this was the only one he trusted. A black sedan, a government model, rolled onto the tarmac at a speed that defied all airfield regulations. It skidded to a stop. The back door opened. Senator Marcus Bellamy stepped out. I stopped breathing. Senator Bellamy, the architect of the new healthcare reform bill, the man whose picture was everywhere, shaking hands, kissing babies, the man Carmen had been investigating for years, the man Luca had been donating to, trying to buy legitimacy for his new logistics empire. I saw Luca freeze in the shadow of the hangar across the field. Even from this distance, I could feel his shock. The auditor was not just a criminal, he was the law. Bellamy smoothed his suit. He looked annoyed, like a king forced to deal with a plumbing problem. He ignored Rinaldi and walked straight toward the operations building, straight toward me. I stepped out of the server room as he entered the small office. He did not startle. He just looked at me, my greasy jumpsuit, my data-smeared hands. He said, it was not a question. Me, I agreed. You built a beautiful system, Senator, really tight code, but you forgot one thing. You cannot build a digital lock that the original architect cannot pick." His eyes were cold, dead. He gestured at the chaos outside. "All this, for what? A child who does not even know your name." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "I have seen the file. Sophia has a family, a good one. They love her. They are her parents. You are just a biological error, a non-existent mother." My hand clenched. I wanted to hit him instead. I smiled. It was a terrible, sharp smile. "Existence is not paperwork. Senator," I said, "it is truth, and you are done." He laughed. "You think you have won. You are a technician in a stolen suit. I am the man who writes the laws you live by. Who do you think they will believe?" "Them," I said, nodding toward the door. The doors burst open. Federal Bureau of Investigation, hands in the air now. Aisha Patel was in the lead, tactical vest on, her gun steady. Behind her, a woman in a crisp suit, Agent Danielle Porter from Seattle, flanked by a team of federal agents. The world dissolved into noise. Bellamy's men, Rinaldi's men, they were not soldiers. They were thugs. They just started shooting. I did not wait. I knew what I needed. The sniffer was good, but the original drive in that server rack was better. It held everything. The raw, unedited logs of every transaction the auditor had ever made. I dove back into the server room. The air was filled with gunpowder and the shriek of ricocheting bullets. Issa Luca's voice, a roar. He was there, appearing from the side entrance, a gun in his hand. He was not wearing a vest. He was just a man in a black shirt, moving with a speed that was terrifying. He put himself between me and the doorway, a living shield. He did not look at me. He just aimed, his arm steady, and fired. 2 shots, precise, controlled. 2 of Rinaldi's men went down. "Get the drive," he yelled. I ripped the main server open. Bullets shattered the glass wall behind me, spraying me with fractured safety glass. I found the master drive, slammed the release, and tore it free. It was hot in my hand. Got it. We moved, him walking backward, covering our retreat, me tucked behind his shoulder. We burst back onto the tarmac. It was chaos. Agents were yelling. Men were down. Then I saw him, Don Vittorio, when he was standing by the landing gear of the helicopter. Somehow untouched by the firefight, he raised a small, silver pistol. He was not aiming at the agents. He was aiming at my back. "Luca," I screamed, trying to turn. A shot rang out, but it was not from Vittorio's gun. It was from the shadows, near the hangar. Vittorio looked down at his own chest, a dark stain spreading over his expensive coat. He looked surprised. He collapsed to his knees. I followed the line of the shot. Enzo was standing there, his own gun still raised, smoke drifting from the barrel. He looked at Luca. He did not smile. He just nodded, a final settling of accounts. He had made his choice. Aisha had Bellamy on his knees, his hands cuffed behind his back. Agent Porter was securing Dr. Colton, who was crying like a child. I walked over to Bellamy. He looked up at me, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. I pulled out my laptop, my fingers flying. I plugged in the drive I'd just stolen. I'm streaming the entire ledger to a secure cloud server as we speak. "Senator," I said, my voice loud enough for Porter and Aisha to hear, "and I have just initiated a dead man's switch." Bellamy's eyes widened. "It is tied to my biometrics," I continued, enjoying the look on his face. "If my heart stops for more than 30 seconds, the entire file, unredacted, including the adoption records you buried and the Seattle address you sent that photo from, goes to every major news outlet on the planet. The truth, not the paperwork." Porter looked at me, her expression unreadable. "That is obstruction, Miss Caruso." "That," I said, closing the laptop, "is insurance." "Oh, Vinnie Rinaldi was screaming at a federal agent. Something about his accounts. "My money! You cannot just take my money!" I walked past him. I walked past the agents. I walked over to where Vittorio was lying on the tarmac, the rain starting to mix with the blood. Enzo was gone, vanished back into the shadows he lived in. Luca was already there, kneeling. Vittorio looked up at his nephew. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound, the bloodline. "Luca," he whispered, grabbing the front of Luca's shirt, "you were supposed to protect the blood." He did not finish. His eyes went blank. Luca gently unhooked his uncle's fingers from his shirt. He stood up. The wind from the helicopter blades was dying, the whine of the engines powering down. I stood in that wind, the stolen drive in my hand, the air tasting of jet fuel and rain. I looked at Luca, his face streaked with grime, his arm still bandaged, his gun now safely tucked away. He had lied to me. He had betrayed me. He had made an impossible choice and had taken mine away. And he had just walked through gunfire to protect me. I realized, in that cold, chaotic moment, that loving him was not the dependency I had feared for 7 years. It was not a cage. I had spent so long building walls to prove I did not need him. I had forgotten what it felt like to trust someone. Trust was not weakness. It was a weapon. And it was the only thing that had gotten us through the night. It was the only thing that would give us the strength to face what came next. The news cycle exploded. It turned out that a dead man switch tied to a major national security figure tended to get people's attention. My insurance policy had worked. Before Senator Marcus Bellamy could even post bail, the first wave of the Mercy Ledger hit the press. It was not just a local scandal, it was a federal catastrophe. The headlines were brutal. Senator Bellamy was indicted on a staggering list of charges: kidnapping, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering. The Rinaldi Capital Fund was frozen. Every asset locked down tighter than a drum. St. Bridget Hospital was not just under investigation, it was shuttered, a crime scene. The world I had known, the dark underbelly of power and money, had been eviscerated. Luca did not wait. He did not hide. He called a press conference. I watched it on a secure monitor from a federal safe house. He stood in front of the community center Carmen had fought for, his arm in a black sling, his face bruised, but his eyes clear. He announced he was permanently severing all ties with the old family businesses. He did not mince words. He called his uncle's actions a betrayal of their name and their community. Then, he announced his largest and final act as the head of the Moretti family. He was liquidating every asset, every holding company, every offshore account Don Vittorio had ever hidden. And he was transferring the entire fortune, hundreds of millions of dollars, into a new trust. He called it the Mercy Truth Fund. It would be dedicated to supporting victims of the medical and political corruption Carmen had died fighting. He was giving it all away. He was washing his hands of the blood money, not with soap, but with fire. 2 days later, I was on a federal jet, flying to Seattle. Agent Danielle Porter sat across from me, her expression professional, but her eyes held a new, cautious respect. "You understand," she said, sipping her coffee, "that this is not a reunion. This is an introduction to a victim of a federal crime." "She's not a victim." "Agent Porter," I said, looking out the window at the clouds. "She is my daughter." "Her name is Sophia Winters," Porter said gently. "Her parents are David and Sarah Winters. They are good people. Issa, they are as innocent in this as you were." I knew that. That was the part that tore me in two. The Winters' home was in a quiet, green suburb. It was covered in climbing roses and had a bicycle tipped over in the driveway. It was a picture of a life I had never known. David and Sarah Winters were exactly what Porter had said. Kind, gentle, software engineers. I think their faces were etched with a confusion and a terror so profound it made my own grief feel selfish. They had been told by Agent Porter that their daughter's adoption had been facilitated by criminal means. They had not been told the biological mother was sitting in their living room. "She is at band practice," Sarah said, her hands twisting in her lap. We have not told her anything. How do you tell your child her entire life is a lie?" "You do not," I said, my voice surprising me with its steadiness, "because it is not. You are her parents. You raised her. You love her. That is the only part that is not a lie." Sarah looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. "Who are you?" "My name is Isabella. I was a friend of the woman who uncovered this. Her name was Carmen Alvarez." And then the door opened. A girl with a clarinet case slung over her shoulder walked in. She had dark, curly hair, pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing ripped jeans and a faded band t-shirt. She stopped when she saw us. She looked at her parents' faces, then at Agent Porter, then at me. She had Luca's eyes. My heart stopped. It just stopped. 7 years. No, 15 years. My math had been wrong. They had not taken her as a newborn. The files, the adoption, they had taken her later. No, the photo, the picture they had sent me, that was her. Older. My mind was scrambling. The birth certificate said 7 years ago. The picture was a teenager. Wait, the adoption file. The photograph of the baby with the birthmark. That was Sophia, 7 years old. The other picture, the one they had sent to threaten me, the one of a 15-year-old girl. Who is that? I had asked Luca in the bathhouse. I do not know. He had said a ghost, a threat, but not her. My timeline snapped back into place. My daughter was 7. She was not the teenager in the threat photo. She was this small person standing in the doorway, looking at us with those impossibly familiar, intelligent eyes. She looked just like the Polaroid. "Hi," she said, her voice small. David cleared his throat. "Sophia, honey, this is Agent Porter, and this is her friend, Isa." I held out my hand. "It is nice to meet you. Sophia, I love your t-shirt. That is a great band." I did not say, "I am your mother." I did not say, "I have died 1,000 deaths looking for you." I did not say anything that would break this fragile, perfect, normal moment. I just sat on the floor with her, and I told her about Carmen. I told her about a woman who ran a community center, who believed in helping people, and who was brave enough to fight monsters. Her eyes, Luca's eyes, lit up. "She sounds like a superhero." I said, my voice thick, she really was. We spent 3 days in Seattle. We brought in therapists. We brought in lawyers. The Winters were terrified they would lose her. "You will not, I promise them." The words tasting like acid but feeling like truth. "You are her family. I will not be the person who destroys a second home." The agreement was complicated. The law was a mess, but we found a path. Sophia's legal guardianship would remain, untouched, with David and Sarah Winters, but a formal, open connection agreement would be filed. I was not her mother. Legally, I was a biological relative, an aunt, a cousin, a name in a box. But it was a start. It was a door, unlocked. Carmen's funeral was held at St. Gabriel's. The church was packed. The people she had saved, the lives she had touched, spilled out onto the steps, onto the street. The real press was there this time. Not the Rinaldi-owned tabloids, but the national news. My foster sister, Mara, held my hand as I walked up to the podium. I looked out at the crowd. I saw Aisha Patel in the front row, her face set. I saw Agent Porter. And in the back, standing in the shadows by the shattered stained glass window, was Luca. He was not beside me. He was not claiming me. He was just there, bearing witness. He was with me. I read the eulogy. I spoke about the woman who had saved me, the woman who had died for a truth she could not ignore. I told them about the Mercy Truth Fund. I told them that Carmen's fight was not over. It was just beginning. After, in the church basement, Aisha found me. She hugged me hard. "Enzo turned himself in this morning," she said quietly in my ear. "He walked right into the precinct. He is testifying against Rinaldi's entire network. He's giving them everything. He's going away for a long time." She pulled back, her eyes smiling. Though her face was sad, "Carmen would be so proud of you, Isa. You did not just find the truth. You kept Mercy alive, in the truest sense. That night, I was not in a safe house. I was at Luca's lake house, the one place he had kept that was truly his. Far from the city, the rain was falling, a gentle, healing sound on the roof, so different from the violent storm that had started all of this. We sat on the covered porch, a fire burning in the hearth, the smell of pine and wet earth in the air. We did not touch. We just sat, 2 feet of space between us, a universe of pain and lies and shared history. "I am sorry, Isabella," he said, his voice quiet, directed at the dark water. "Is not enough, I know that." "No," I said. "It is not. You did not save me, Luca. You made a choice for me. You took away my right to fight, my right to even know she was alive." "I know," he whispered. "I was a coward. I called it protection. But it was fear. My fear of losing you, of my uncle, of failing." I looked at him, at the man who had walked through bullets for me, who had given away an empire to honor a woman he had never even met. "I love you," I said. The words hung in the cold night air. "I think I never stopped, but I will not be a protected asset. Luca, I will not be a liability you manage." He finally turned to look at me, his steel eyes vulnerable, stripped bare. "I do not want to manage you. I just want to stand with you. If you will let me." "Love with conditions," then I said. He flinched, but I held up my hand. My condition, the truth, always, no matter how ugly, no matter how much it hurts, we do not lie, we do not hide, we do not handle things for each other, we face them. He nodded slowly, a profound, solemn agreement, the truth, always. Later, I unpacked the small box of Carmen's belongings that Mara had saved for me. It was not much. A few books, a picture of us at the shelter's opening, and a small, carved wooden box. Inside, there was a string of simple, wooden rosary beads. Beneath them, a small, folded piece of paper. I opened it. Carmen's handwriting? "Family finds you when you least expect it." I smiled through the tears. I picked up my phone. I had a new number in my contacts, a number in Seattle. I typed a message. "When you are ready, there is a shore here for you. We can wait. Isa." I hit send. 3 months later, the rain on the lake was gentle, a rhythmic shushing against the shore, nothing like the violent downpour that had baptized our new reality. The lake house was no longer a safe house, no longer a fortress. It was just a house, and for the first time since I was a child, it felt like a home. The quiet was broken by a sound that still felt alien, a sound that made my chest tighten, with a feeling so bright it almost hurt. Laughter. My foster sister, Mara, was standing at the edge of the dock, her arm around a small, vibrating figure. Sophia. She was 7 years old, a tiny whirlwind of dark curls and fierce, intelligent eyes. She was visiting for 2 weeks, a complex, delicate arrangement negotiated by therapists and lawyers, a bridge between her life in Seattle and this new, strange reality in New York. Mara was pointing at the water, and Sophia was laughing, a high, clear sound that carried across the water. It was the sound of 2 generations of my life, the sister who had saved me and the daughter I had just found, colliding in a moment of simple, uncomplicated joy. I was learning not to run. For 7 years, my first instinct at any loud noise, any unexpected emotion, was to bolt, to build a wall, to retreat into my code. Now, I forced myself to stand on the porch, lean against the railing, and just watch, to let the joy in, even though it terrified me. Luca was learning, too. He was learning to step back. The old Luca would have been on that dock, hovering, a dark sentinel ensuring her safety, managing the situation. The new Luca sat in a chair on the lawn, reading a book, pretending not to watch them. He had learned the hardest lesson that protection was not control. He scheduled his visits. He called. He asked. He did not command. He was learning to be a father, not a Don. The world had shifted, settled into a new, strange alignment. The Mercy Truth Fund was officially open. I had taken the helm, pouring my rage and Carmen's legacy into its foundation. The main offices were in a bright, high-tech space in Midtown, a world away from my old crisis line basement. In the lobby, carved into a slab of polished black granite, was Carmen's name. I had been there late last night, long after the staff had gone home. I had traced the cold letters with my fingertips. We did it. Carmen, I whispered to the empty room. We really did. The fund's first act was to establish a legal defense and relocation program for medical whistleblowers. We were already protecting 2 nurses and a doctor who were speaking out against other hospitals in the Rinaldi network. The legal fallout was seismic. Agent Danielle Porter called me weekly. The case against Senator Bellamy was locked tight. He was facing a new round of indictments, including human trafficking and conspiracy. He was never getting out. He was buried so deep under the weight of his own corruption that his name was already becoming a cautionary tale. St. Bridget Hospital was gone, dissolved, its assets seized. The board had issued a series of humiliating public apologies and was settling lawsuits with dozens of families, other victims of the auditor's horrific human marketplace. Even Enzo had found a new path. His testimony had been the final key, the insider's voice that connected all the pieces, corroborating every file on the ledger. He had taken a plea deal, accepting responsibility for his role in the Moretti organization. He was serving a 10-year sentence in a medium-security facility. Mara visited him. She said he was different. He was running a coding program for the other inmates, teaching them skills for the outside. He told them, Mara said, a small, wry smile on her face, that hacking is a tool. He said the next time they break into a system, they should do it for justice, not for money. A gray man. Finally choosing a side. But one piece still bothered me, one loose thread. The call. The very first domino. The anonymous call to Luca's private line. She's leaving, sir. And you're the last name she spoke. It had been routed through a ghost network, bounced off satellites, masked 6 ways, but I was Isabella Caruso. I was the one who had built shadow networks for Luca, and I was the one who had built a fortress for Carmen. I could not let it go. I was at the lake house, sitting at the kitchen island, my laptop open. Luca was outside, finally coaxed into a game of checkers with Sophia on the porch. I had been running a deep trace algorithm for a week, letting it chew through the encrypted data packet I had pulled from Luca's phone records. An alert finally pinged. My trace had found a source. I got an email. It arrived in my secure inbox, no sender, no subject, just a signature. Mercy. It was not a message. It was a file, a full, unencrypted server log, the original point of contact for the call to Luca. My fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing the originating internet protocol address. It was not one of Luca's men. It was not Enzo. It was not a federal agent. The IP address resolved to a public computer terminal at a youth outreach center, a satellite branch of the Mercy Fund in Seattle. My blood went cold. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. I ran the login credentials for that terminal, cross-referencing the exact timestamp of the call. The terminal had been logged in by a guest user. The program accessed was an advanced voice modulation software, routing through an encrypted network. The guest user was registered for a weekly class, Advanced Coding and Internet Research for Kids. The name on the class roster, Sophia Winters. It was not Carmen who made the call. It was not an informant. It was Sophia. This 7-year-old child, my 7-year-old child, had been looking for me. She must have been, with her intelligence, with the skills from that class. She must have started digging. She must have found Carmen. She must have realized Carmen was her only link to me, to her biological past. She knew Carmen was in danger, and she did the one thing she knew would work. She did not call the police. She called the other name she must have uncovered in her research, the only name powerful enough to change the board, Luca Moretti. She was the one who pulled the alarm. She was the one who brought us all to Carmen's bedside. This tiny girl, with my brain and Luca's instincts, had set the entire war in motion. My hands flew to my mouth. A sound escaped, a choked sob that was half a laugh. Tears streamed down my face, hot and fast. She had not been a passive prize. She had not been a victim waiting to be rescued. She had been a player. She had found us. She had chosen us. I was still shaking when I walked onto the porch, the printout of the log clutched in my hand. Luca looked up from the checkerboard. He saw my face and was on his feet in an instant. "Isa, What is it? What is wrong?" I could not speak. I just held out the paper. He took it. He read the IP address. He read the user log. He read the name. His face paled. He looked over at Sophia, who was now intently focused on moving her king. Then he looked back at the paper. Then, finally, he looked at me. He let out a long, slow breath, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. A small, incredulous smile touched his lips. He looked at our daughter, the 7-year-old puppet master, and then back at me. "Well," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "are you ready for a family this weird?" I stepped into his side, leaning my head against his good shoulder, the one that no longer bore a scar from a bullet meant for me. I watched my sister and my daughter. Sophia looked up and saw us watching. She gave us a brilliant, gap-toothed smile. "As long as it is a real one," I whispered. The fragments of my life, the broken pieces of my past, the ghosts of Carmen and my parents, the betrayal of Vittorio, the loyalty of Enzo, the family I had in Mara, the future I had in Sophia, and the impossible, complicated love I had for Luca. They were not healed. They were just real. I thought of Carmen's note, the one I now kept in my wallet, the paper soft from being folded and unfolded. "Family finds you when you least expect it." I looked at the impossible, fractured, beautiful family we had built from the ashes, and for the first time in my entire life, I truly believed her. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Where in the world are you listening from? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and give it a huge boost by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.